Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rick.
You guys are stalwarts, making it through to the fourth morning of the UNC conference. The end is in sight, but we're not there yet. We've got some good stuff to get through today. Hello also to our online audience. Today we're going to be talking about climate resilient wash, what exactly that is and how you might monitor it, and specifically how global monitoring could be developed, including by the JMP and GLASS teams at WHO and UNICEF. So we've got a packed agenda. I'm going to get started. I'm Rick Johnston with the WHO, leading the WHO side of the Joint Monitoring Program. But this is very much a joint program all along, or a joint initiative between WHO and UNICEF. So basically today you'll hear from me and from Professor Barbara Evans at Leeds, who I think everyone knows, about a process that we've gone through over the past year and a half to review and come up with suggested candidate indicators for further development related to climate resilience and WASH. Then we've got a draft short list, which we're going to walk through with you. You'll see on tables we have some printouts. We don't have very many, so please share with your neighbors. And we'll be using that when we come to group work afterwards. So, no homework, but as Barbara and I go through the short list, you might look at that and see, how it fits in with the other candidate indicators on that document. And then, standard plenary feedback and close. We're also going to have a global webinar next week, next Wednesday, so we'll be inviting you to that as well. And we'll also be asking you for feedback, based on today's session, how we could effectively run next week's webinar. So bear that in mind as well as we go through. With that, I think I want to hand over to Barbara. Oh no, I'm doing the introduction. Barbara's like, no, not yet. Okay, on to the introduction. So, climate resilience, obviously an issue of our day, maybe the issue of our day, and with the JMP and GLASS holding positions of global prominence in global monitoring of WASH, there have been a lot of demands placed on us, requests to start monitoring climate resilience in WASH. And we've always responded to those requests by saying, well, we don't really know what climate resilience is. There aren't agreed indicators. There aren't agreed metrics. It's really tough. But, at some point, you can't stop. You can't say, no, we can't do that. We can't do that. We can't do that. So we launched a process to conduct a review of monitoring climate resilience that started by identifying what sector stakeholders are doing in the field. What are the frameworks that they're using? What indicators, what data are being collected to describe links between WASH and climate resilience? To do this work, we engaged a consortium of research partners led by Leeds University, also with Bristol, Oxford, and University Technology Sydney to support this work. We also constituted a technical working group of about 20 people with different experiences, different regions, to help review the outputs from the academic group and also advise us about ways forward. Professor Tanvir Ahmed here is on that technical working group. A couple other people at the conference have been. And we've also made multiple public engagements. I'll talk about the public webinars we've had, but we want this to be a consultative process so that in the end we can identify areas where GLASS and JMP could direct future monitoring efforts. This is all happening in parallel to the global goal on adaptation, where there's a much bigger political process to set up indicators, but our process is feeding into that. So just a brief timeline, we engaged the Leeds and other partners in March 2024, constituted this technical working group, had a first public webinar in July. The working group reviewed the scope and the evidence reviews that the academics did over the course of 2024, and we had a second public consultation in February to share the results of those reviews. We're working on some papers now. And that led to a second technical working group meeting to review a long list of indicators that were derived from that review. We put that long list out for a second public consultation in April, revised that based on feedback, and have now been moving to get the list shorter and shorter We had a third technical work group meeting just last month, and next week we're going to have a public consultation on this short list that we think are good to take forward for eventual piloting in pilot countries and another round of reviews after the pilots. That public consultation is next Wednesday. We have 2 time slots to accommodate people in different parts of the world. Probably the 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Europe time is going to be better for people in this hemisphere. And I'll put this slide up at the end, so you don't need to worry to focus on it now. But basically, we want a lot of feedback from different partners about this draft short list before we take it to piloting in 2026 and beyond. Barbara, can you tell us about this review?
Well, maybe. Some of you who've been involved in the process for a long time will have seen this picture. So just to highlight, and I'm going to talk about it again in the plenary, when we talk about resilience in water, sanitation and hygiene, we're not just talking about the infrastructure. So we did a lot of thinking at the beginning to work out what's included within climate resilient WASH. And what this shows you is it's almost like a theory of change. So we're basically saying that resilience results from, on the left-hand side, intentional adaptation actions which are taken at national or local government level, so policies, institutional arrangements, financing, regulatory interventions. Those all will have an influence on, at the top, adaptation actions which are taken by service providers. We're also interested in adaptation actions that happen in the public sphere generally to create connections between the WASH sector and the water resources sector, and water supply and sanitation, drainage and solid waste. And if you take all of those things together with the policy, you might end up with water, sanitation and hygiene infrastructure which has certain attributes that we might think lead to resilience. All of that together hopefully will give us service outcomes. So at the outcome level, we're interested in what kind of services do people experience under climate change conditions. And then at the far right-hand end, we're also interested in user experience. So that's where we're trying to pick up not just on did your water supply keep running, but also how confident were you that it would keep running? How much stress did you go through to think whether or not, you know, the hurricane that's incoming is going to disrupt your life? So what that picks up, if you like, is the kind of ecosystem of the WASH world, that all of which collectively will result in resilience. Around the edge are all the things which are excluded, because people are forever saying to us, well, what about the resilience of water resources at large? And we say, yes, super important, very nice, not quite in scope. So really we kind of try and focus in on the things which are within the gift, essentially, of water service providers, sanitation service providers and hygiene providers. As Rick said, we carried out 5 reviews. We did 3 systematic reviews looking for evidence that links particular interventions, so particular adaptation actions or particular attributes, and evidence that those actually give you more resilient outcomes. And headline news, there's not a lot of evidence. We have 1 for sanitation, 1 for hygiene, 1 for WASH in general. We also did 2 further reviews. One was an umbrella review for water supply. There have been a lot of systematic reviews in water supply specifically on this topic, so we didn't do another systematic review, we did an umbrella review of reviews. And we did a scoping review about how resilience is conceptualized in the WASH sector, but we also went outside and looked at energy, transport, the health sector to see how resilience is conceptualized and monitored. And that review is probably feeding more into our thinking about how we're going to construct the indicators. Out of that whole process, we identified sort of broad objectives. What types of things do people think contribute to resilience? So a good example of this is early warning systems. So we were looking for sort of clumps of ideas, and then within each of those objectives, we were looking in the literature for candidate indicators. So we had more than 600 things which people have proposed to be monitored, which might be good indicators of resilience. We didn't expect it to be 600. We have the world's largest spreadsheet. Fortunately, we have the world's smartest young people working on the project, managing the spreadsheet. So our list 101 had 600 indicators. And then we thought, the world doesn't want to look at a list of 600 indicators. What shall we do? And Rick's going to tell us what we did, if we can remember.
We started cutting is what we did. So that first list, long list of 600 indicatory things, that just represents anything that someone, somewhen, somewhere said this would be a good thing, this could be an indicator. Many of them need a lot of work. So a first cut was done in March to cut to a 2.0 list of about 422 indicators just by consolidating, combining things that were basically different versions of the same indicator linking to that same indicator objective. We also did a little bit of gap filling here when we had an indicator objective that was pretty clear, but none of the candidate indicators matched it well at all. So that version we put up on the public website. We had a consultation between April and May, and incorporated feedback from that to come up with a 3.0 list of 317 indicators, which is also available on our website. And then in June, cut that more to about 200 indicators, again, by prioritizing within those indicator objectives and doing a bit more consolidation and tidying up. Then, just in the last couple months, we took that list of 200 and made another cut to get to a 5.0 list of about 100 indicators, 104 indicators. And this is a set that we think are all worthy proto-indicators. They're not indicators yet, but with some good development, we feel like they have promise and could be useful going forward. However, some of them are too context-specific for global monitoring, and the JMP and GLASS teams cannot take forward a list of 104 indicators. So we worked with our technical working group to prioritize further within that, and also to look at balance among the different components, among the different types of hazards, to come up with a 5.1 list, which you see a draft of on your tables. And that has 42 candidate indicators for global monitoring, and the other 63 indicators, we feel are good. We would put them out for public review, but we're not going to have the capacity to develop those. So over the course of 2026, then, we want to work with interested pilot countries to operationalize these, to get definitions and clear metrics, and how would you actually measure this thing. Now we're going to get into the list. Yes?
Is it you or me first?
No, it's me. It's me.
Oh, I'll go.
So on the left side of that conceptual framework, you have a cluster of things around enabling environment type issues, policies, institutions, regulations, and finance. This is the kind of thing that the GLASS initiative tends to measure. And I'm going to start with those, then pass over to Barbara. So the first indicator you see, 101, it's about having policies and plans that are in place, that align with adaptation plans and are regularly revised. And also that those policies and plans, asterisk, reference current and future climate risks. So there's a lot of elements to this 101, and you might say, that's not one indicator, that's 3 or possibly 7 indicators. We agree. That's where the indicator development would come in, and we do feel that it would be possible to collapse these into a kind of score or a index, because they're all related. In contrast, number 102 there, around sector policies, calling for risk-based management plans, that's an easier kind of yes or no type of question that, again, is the kind of thing that GLASS routinely does now. Also within policy, there are 2 proposed indicators about climate resilience planning around national adaptation plans and national mitigation plans. Both of these are multi-element, so we would look to collapse those into some kind of index or stacked indicator. But they relate to planning, national planning. And 106 there is about mitigation. And we had long discussions about the role of mitigation in this framework. And really, mitigation is largely out of scope for a climate resilience review. But some things that you can do to be climate resilience will result in carbon emissions. So there's a role for a little bit of mitigation in our work, and we thought this was a good compromise because it's not about calculating carbon tons. It's about making sure that there is a policy in place to do that, and that's built into strategies. So those are the 4 policy, no, there's a 5th policy indicator here around equity. Sorry, just making sure that since climate hazards don't impact everyone of equally. We want to make sure that there are strategies to ensure that climate resilient WASH investments are focused on the most vulnerable populations at the policy level. Now, remember, we have a list of about 100 indicators that we think are good, but we couldn't list them all. So I'm just showing one example here of something that's on that longer list. It's on the printouts in front of you, but we're not proposing to take it forward for the JMP and GLASS teams. This is one about mandating that sufficient quantities of water supply be provided and prioritizing that over other water uses. We've recommended 3 indicators around institutions. This first one is about the use of climate data and seasonal forecasts for WASH service delivery. Are these data being downscaled and accessible for use by WASH sector stakeholders? Are they relevant to WASH service delivery? Are they reviewed and updated regularly and used to inform updates to WASH policies and plans? Again, that looks like a lot of indicators, but we believe that we will be able to collapse these into some kind of index or stacked indicator. The other 2 institutional indicators relate to early warning systems and national WASH monitoring systems. So you see 202 about having early warning systems in place, having multiple elements, and 203 talking about collecting data on the impact of climate on WASH services. Now, this indicator doesn't specify which impacts those would be, just that there's something in place at the national level in monitoring systems that does track impacts of climate on WASH services. Also, that this would apply to households and schools and healthcare facilities in different geographies, service levels, and population subgroups. So you'll see in some of the other indicators we often refer to populations, schools, and healthcare facilities where we think that the same indicator can apply to those 3 different groups. For regulation, we have 3 related proposed indicators. These are all about having standards and regulations available that can take into account current and future climate, whether that's about design and construction or operation and maintenance of resilient infrastructure or restoration of services during and following a climate event regulation. And we have just a pair of indicators related to finance. The first is about budget allocations. How does the budget allocation compare to the total annual costs identified that are needed for WASH climate adaptation? And then, since we know that budgeted funds are not always fully utilized, the second indicator is about the ratio of actual expenditure to those total annual costs identified. So that's the first block there, and Barbara's going to talk us through the next area in the conceptual framework.
We're switching here to try and make it, cool and enlivening. Hope that's working. So the second set, if you remember on the framework, these are the ones which sit at the top. These are adaptation actions which are made by institutions or organizations responsible for the delivery of services. The first one in this group are the specific group of people who are responsible for hygiene promotion or who work in the supply chain. Supply chains is a really interesting area that we've talked about a lot. Obviously, in emergency response or in response to climate events, you often want to ask, how do we get material to the ground? And that can be, in this case, hygiene materials for people to use in the immediate short run. You'll see on the water supply and sanitation side, we're also interested in reconstruction materials. So supply chains become very important, and we've spent a lot of time thinking about how the transport sector deals with resilience, because that has a nice overlap here. So this one is about hygiene promotion and supply chain actors, and here we were really thinking about event-specific preparedness plans. We're trying to work out what is the thing that you most want to see, and what you most want to see is a recognition that there may be a disruption, and what are we going to do about this? It highlights perhaps a little bit of an issue with all of this work, that global indicators are challenging in this space because the precise type of climate effects that we see in different contexts are going to be very different, and the types of services that those effects act on are going to be different in different contexts. So this is an example of one where we've tried to go up to a level which is going to be generalizable across, global geographies everywhere. So this is about having sort of action plans in place. On the other side, for service providers who provide services for water supply and sanitation, we have a pair of matched indicators which are about people doing risk-based management. So, for example, versions of water safety planning and sanitation safety planning that would be, by definition, taking into account current and future climate effects. We also are particularly interested in emphasising that resilience is a lot about operations and maintenance. So we wanted to really ask whether service providers are conforming to those national regulatory standards for operations and maintenance. So this one has a direct link back to one that Rick's already shown you, number 302, and that's another thread that we've tried to use in this work is to have, so there's a whole bunch of indicators that relate to operation and maintenance, and some of them are in policy and some of them are in the adaptation action space, and we're trying to link those together. This is still me, right? Yeah. Obviously, everybody knows that water resources matter, and as I said, we've had a lot of discussion about the exact boundary where the WASH sector can speak with any sort of useful authority about the connections between water resources. So one of the things that we really thought was interesting was actually to just see, assuming that there is a water resources management plan in the country, the question is to what extent does the WASH sector engage with that in its own investment and operational planning. So this is an indicator, this top one here, that we thought we could specifically ask about explicit links that are made in investment planning between our sector, if you like, and the wider water sector. And we also have a catchment-based one here, essentially asking about the proportion of the population who live in catchments where water resources management is taking into account the needs of our sector. So these two work as a pair. One is about our sector looking outwards to water resources, and the second one is really about the extent to which we've managed to have our sector included and addressed in the water resources management space. Similarly, we had a long conversation about how to measure whether or not we're thinking about drainage and solid waste, particularly for urban sanitation. Obviously, drainage and solid waste are critically important. I'm old enough to have grown up in the era of environmental sanitation, where these links were taken for granted. So we were, again, trying to think of a measure where we could say our investment and operational plans are taking into account the current and future condition of drainage and solid waste. So we're being cognizant of that situation, particularly in urban spaces. Still me, I think. An outcome of engagement with the water resources management sector is the quality of water. We had a lot of conversation about which attributes of water resources are we most interested in the WASH sector. We're interested in a lot. I mean, obviously this is crucially important. But one of the things to bear in mind is we're not looking for indicators which relate to being a good WASH practitioner. I mean, obviously having enough water resources is always something that a WASH practitioner would need to ask. Here we were trying to think of specific indicators that are about effects that might be exacerbated, if you like, under climate events. So one of the areas that we were particularly interested in was incidents of water quality non-compliance downstream from wastewater. And that's the idea there is that that's picking up failures in the sanitation system which are resulting in inappropriate discharges into water resources, which would have knock-on effects on the quality of water downstream. You'll see in the list there are other candidates. We've had lots of very heated conversations about this. I feel honour bound to channel the spirit of one of our technical working group colleagues, Shamps, and say we don't have a groundwater indicator in the shortlist, and that's been something we've wrestled with a lot, so something for you all to think about. I hate to say that in front of Will, but we're acknowledging that has been challenging and interesting. Okay, finally, for me, I mean, not finally, there'll be more, we have a block which is about the attributes of infrastructure. Now, this is the area where when we started, more people came up to us and said, I know the answer to the problem. The answer is, well, the classic one is raising latrines. Raising latrines, let's raise latrines. So we looked very, very hard, I promise you, for evidence that raising latrines makes them more resilient, and I'm sorry to say, we found none. We also found a lot of evidence that raising latrines makes them very inaccessible for members, certain members of the population. But that's not really the point. The point is, what you actually do to your infrastructure is so context specific. It depends so much on the type of service that you're delivering and the particular climate hazards that you are addressing. So in the end, we chose a pair of indicators which again link back to that earlier regulatory indicator. Do you have a regulation? Do you have technical norms and standards in your country, or in our country, or in anyone's country, which tell us what types of infrastructure adaptations are required in your context? And then this question is, are you doing those things? So a really good example of this might be something very technical and nerdy. You might say for wastewater treatment infrastructure and sewers and sanitation infrastructure in flood-prone areas, we recommend that the normal standard of a 40 mil cover over reinforced steel should be increased to an 80 mil cover to reduce the risk of scouring. Just as a very nerdy technical example. We're never going to have that as a global indicator, but we might ask in a country where that has been agreed as a construction standard, is that being implemented in the wash sector? So that's what these two are intended to do. We have a specific construction and design standards indicator in hygiene which relates to schools, and a specific one relating to healthcare facilities, because that's where we feel that the construction of the infrastructure, we can really identify whether that construction is, again, meeting these norms and standards. And then that brings me to service functioning, so I get to hand back to the lovely Rick. I feel like we should do some kind of dance.
Is everyone exhausted? We're about halfway through. No. We've covered most of the upstream elements that might be more monitored by glass-type mechanisms, and we're moving into spaces about outputs and outcomes that are traditionally where the JMP is focused. So this first set we've got actually 8 candidate indicators around service functioning. And the first set are, and in this set you'll see a lot of parallel structures between water and sanitation and hygiene. And the first ones are to look at the existing SDG indicators of safely managed drinking water, safely managed sanitation, and you'll see basic hygiene on the next slide, and saying, well, great, you have that at the national level. What do things look like in the most vulnerable areas? What do they look like in nationally determined climate hazard zones? And we feel like that will be an interesting contrast that gets at resilience and also the most vulnerable populations. Now that's a technical challenge because currently we can't disaggregate safely managed drinking water or sanitation to local levels, but there's huge demand for that. You can see how it would happen. It will require a lot of work, but it's an achievable thing to do, we think. And then there's the version for hygiene, about having access to soap and water at hand washing facilities.
If you're wondering where we are in the handout, we're on about page 10, and just so you know, they're organised by water supply and sanitation, 10 and 11.
Great. Next, we have a pair of proposed indicators around damage. Okay. Now, these are related to indicators drawn from the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, which is an established thing that happens globally, which includes 38 indicators. So our proposed list of 42 is, is very much in the same league. And one of these Sendai indicators, then, it's about damage to critical infrastructure, including schools and healthcare facilities attributed to disaster. That's Sendai. So we've proposed to make those a bit more specific to refer to water supply infrastructure and sanitation infrastructure, whether it's in populations, communities, or schools, or healthcare facilities. And this will be very relevant to the whole discourse that's going on about loss and damage in climate mitigation. The second pair of next we have a triplet around disruptions to services. So these are related to but distinct from the damage indicators. Damage might reflect an extreme weather event that hits and then it's over. Disruptions could be more slow onset things. It could be due to drought, not so much a hurricane hitting. And these, again, echo Sendai indicators around disruptions to basic services attributed to climate. So you can see the parallel structure here, how many people, schools, healthcare facilities, report having some kind of disruption period in the last Y. This would be part of the indicator development. What's the appropriate recall period? Is it a week? Is it a month? Is it a year? We would work on that. And this one, we do propose versions for water supply, sanitation, and hygiene. You'll notice for damage, we didn't propose a hygiene one. It's not that hygiene infrastructure can't be damaged in extreme weather events. It can, but it tends to be very much household-centric and smaller in economic value than water and sanitation, where there's also large-scale infrastructure that can be damaged. So again, that would be a good indicator, but not on the global shortlist. Next, the right end of the spectrum is around user experiences, and these really matter, and they're a good complement to the more infrastructure or policy-related indicators we've talked about before. So this one is a proposed indicator of both the extent to which services are maintained and the confidence that households have in coping during a crisis. So we've talked about disruptions to services before in the Sendai-derived frameworks. Well, how many people, schools, healthcare facilities that experienced disruptions to service were able to access alternative water supply, sanitation, or we didn't have hygiene here. We didn't do hygiene. Is it on the next slide? Yeah. Could they find an alternative, and not just an alternative, but like an alternative that meets some minimum set of standards about quality? If that alternative is, drinking untreated water from the river, we wouldn't want to count that as a resilient characteristic. For hygiene, we have these two indicators then that are about the ease with which people can access critical hygiene materials following climate events, one around hand hygiene behaviors and one around menstrual hygiene management materials, being able to change them as often as they wanted during and following a climate event. Getting near the end here, we have a pair of indicators that are about experiences felt by people, and these are built on or inspired by the work done on WISE indicators, HWISE, IWISE, and these are about, for water supply, the proportion of population that says that they were worried about not having enough water for all their household needs due to a climate event. And for sanitation, not worry, but the proportion who felt safe during and following climate events at the sanitation locations that they used, which could be alternative to their normal ones. Finally, the last set, I think, is a nice set because we've always been thinking about data sources for all of these. Some of them might come from national workshops and policy questionnaires, some might come from household surveys, but utilities and regulators should routinely collect data on user complaints. So we propose this pair of indicators about the number of complaints that are received by customers for water supply or sanitation during, before, during, and following climate events. How many were received, how many were received and analyzed, and how many were received, analyzed, and acted upon. Again, a stacked indicator. We think that could be collapsed into some kind of index. But if you could have this routinely collected by service providers, then it offers the possibility to do some specialized data collection after an extreme weather event to see what the impact of that weather event was on continuity of service and customer satisfaction. So this is kind of something that should be already happening by service providers, but it also relates to that user experience. So we think that that could be relatively easy to roll out. Okay, that's a set of 42 indicators. Here's how they map onto that framework.
Yeah, here's how they map onto the framework. We actually didn't really decide who was presenting this slide, but just so you can see, I think it's not a surprise that there's quite a big cluster on the policy side. I mean, that's partly because there are 4 dimensions to policy, but also because we think that's actually probably where the rubber hits the road a lot of the time. So those are the ones that we feel, and they're quite glassy. You can see only 4 for the attributes of infrastructure. That wasn't what we anticipated at the beginning. And then you can see that there's a kind of nice balance between service providers, service outcome indicators, and user experiences. There's 8 each for those at the right-hand end. So that's the general balance of what you see. We do apologise profusely. It's kind of hard to get your head around this because there's a lot going on in this framework. I would apologise to you if it wasn't for the fact that we have spent the last year and a half basically killing ourselves trying to work out what it all means for ourselves. And we're doing our best to make it as clear as possible to you. But one of the things we want to ask you in the group work today is any tips to make it easier to get your head around what we're proposing, because it's really hard to explain it. And we're sure we can do better. We were going to take questions, just any questions of clarification for 5 to 10 minutes, and then we do have some group work to propose. So I don't know if there's anybody want to, yes?
So I had a question, and I might have just missed it. So just like reflecting on hurricanes that have been in recently and thinking about disaster with it, what about like, there's a lot on sanitation and water, but what about like the actual stormwater? If it was our hurricane event, like getting that out.
Yeah, it's a really great question. It's out of scope.
Okay, I was wondering if it was
Yeah,
in or out. Okay.
yeah. So, and it's frustrating because of course it would be really important.
Because that's what, in Florida, that's what impacted everyone's sanitation and hygiene. So it's a driver, but not necessarily.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
But I would argue that, can you just point at the adaptation actions relating to solid waste, sort of over there? I mean, the point is, for us in the wash sector, in a place where that's liable to be an issue, there's simply no point building sanitation infrastructure unless that's also being addressed. So we have this very specific indicator that says if you made an investment plan for infrastructure in a hurricane-prone, low-lying area like, well, New Orleans is another good example, right? Did you have all of the stormwater planning embedded in your sanitation planning or not? Because it is super important. But as a specific indicator, like did the stormwater get moved out quickly, that's out of scope. Yeah.
And the stormwater could have direct impacts on water supply infrastructure, which happened here in North Carolina, where the reservoirs flooded, the water was too turbid to be treated, and the treatment plants didn't have turbidity reduction trains in place, so they basically had to wait for things to settle before normal water supply could be restored. So that should show up in that aspect.
Yeah. Whoa, lots of questions. Right, how are we going to do this in order? Yeah. Yeah, you do the mic.
Microphone.
Yeah. We could sweep from right to left or left to right.
Okay.
I'm trying to wrap my head around all of that's really exciting. But I think one of my questions is related to there are several questions that were, and following a climate event, how are you planning on defining that?
So the Sendai framework does have definitions of climate events. We would look to that. This would come during that operationalization phase of working with pilot countries to see, well, are there national definitions or what are the relevant events? But we would look to the types of hazards identified by the IPCC. So, I mean, obviously there's floods and droughts. There's also, wildfires. There's also, I mean, not earthquakes, but there are a range of different hazards that have been identified, and we would work through those. Some of them are going to be hard to implement in terms of monitoring, but that's the discussion we would take at the pilot country level.
Yeah. I think the other thing that what you might notice is the ones that are dark, and the way we've presented them here, we've tended actually to remove that word. We stuck with before, during, and after a climate event for quite a long time. One of the problems with that formulation is it concentrates attention on rapid onset events. And we're really, really trying to, so a lot of these indicators, for example, the ones about service continuity in areas which are affected by climate hazards, you'll notice that that's not connected to a specific event. And the idea there is you just track it over time, and hopefully we'll be able to see whether or not things are holding up, even though there's sea level rise or drought are the two. Yeah, exactly. So that formulation is quite difficult. The one other thing we didn't mention is that we have done another piece of work, which is to look at trying to assemble all of the kind of global data sets and data collection tools that are available. And one of the big areas we've looked at is geolocated climate data. So we're looking for data sets that could be used and brought into this process.
It could inform sampling.
Exactly, exactly,
Yes.
yeah.
I'm not going to say about groundwater. I mean, this is a huge amount of work, so well done.
Thank you.
It looks like a massive task. quite a lot to absorb in a morning pre-coffee. But yeah, I think when I was looking at this, it's like, great, all of these make loads and loads of sense. I think it would be easier to see how kind of operational this is to map it against how you're actually going to collect this data, particularly in like low resource data poor settings, and particularly in a context where sector cash at global and country level is getting less and less. I think it's just being about like how good is enough and how we're going to measure it. So I think the kind of stuff you can get from household surveys, milling for wires, all that sort of stuff makes sense because there's household surveys going on. The glass stuff makes sense, but then there's stuff in the middle and the stuff that really requires the data. I mean, I was in Malawi last week. I was just thinking like, you're not going to be able to answer most of this at the moment. And so it'll just be really interesting to sort of, hear a bit more when you're going to be mapping that, particularly in the cost effectiveness. Just lastly, the defining climate event could be quite an interesting one.
Yeah.
And making that kind of like consistent across
We have actually taken a bunch of climate scientists and locked them in a basement and told them not to leave until this is done. One of them's my son, so, we totally have, control over that part of the... Yeah, it's good. It's all good. Robbie's not leaving till he sorts it out.
Right, and I totally take your point that this is not going to be monitorable in the immediate short term. And in fact, the SDGs still aren't monitorable in many countries. So this is something that will take many years to be realized. So setting expectations, the JMP report next year is not going to have global baselines on climate resilient wash services. Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm from Ethiopia, from the Ministry of Water and Energy. Thank you for the very comprehensive, informative, slides you presented to us. And while you guys are, showing us the slides, I was, going back to Ethiopia and then looking into what we are really currently working in terms of the climate resilient wash program. So in that case, we thought as a ministry, as a chair of the One Wash national program in Ethiopia, coordinating the whole wash program in the country and regulating the water policy nationally, we thought all the wash programs should be climate resilient at all. And we don't have any regular wash program or climate resilient wash program or something.
Correct.
Because we are facing the climate change effect, the two weather extremes of, drought and flood happening here and there, including, landslides in many of, Ethiopia is really a good showcase at this point in time in terms of the climate change effect. And years before, we have been able to secure water at a very shallow ground level. And this time around, we need to drill deeper and deeper and deeper. So we thought all our wash programs should be climate resilient. And what comes into our attention is, you said, climate forecast. So we are lucky that the National Meteorology Authority is an affiliated institution under the line management of the Ministry of Water in case of Ethiopia. So that's my organization, the National Meteorology. And we have programs and projects financed by the World Bank. And one of the program we have is the Horn of Africa climate resilient, the Horn of Africa, resilient for climate project, which is implemented in Somalia, Kenya, and Ethiopia. A very dedicated project, just focusing on climate resilient. And on the other side, on the regular, wash programs, we are just making sure that each and every single coin of investment in the water supply is going to be climate resilient, in a way that will, resist, the climate shocks. So starting from the standards and designs, and each of these individual schemes should serve its own design period. So in that case, one of the challenge which I'm asking you guys to respond is the issue of, securing the minimum required finance and budget for minimum service level for climate resilient wash. So what comes is the issue of the per capita investment, which is losing appetite for the donors. And as you know, in Ethiopia and most of Africa, the settlement pattern is very dispersed and the per capita investment is shooting. And the amount of money required for this basic service is a very critical challenge for us. And we are investing billions for few communities in the pastoralist areas in Somalia, in Afar, part of, Ethiopia, and the cost of, investment is very high and unaffordable, and a very critical challenge for government while negotiating with financing organizations. So what is a thought in this area and your advice? Of course, we have regulations. We have already started, enacting different regulations of, climate resilient, and to make sure that this is directly related and linked, synergized with the water source management. And we have a project for climate resilient water resource management project within the ministry, and we are bringing up the WASH subsector with the water resource management subsector, and for us to work together. And one of the challenge we have is the mapping exercise. And we talk about, the groundwater, we need to have the mapping, and we need to know the amount of water we have on the ground level. The surface water level, that's known.
Yeah.
The rivers, water streams, water bodies, they are there. Ethiopia do have 12 major river basins. But in terms of the groundwater mapping, that's still the challenge. And we have been doing it with UNICEF for some 40 waradas, and the cost is very high.
Yeah.
And we have thousands of waradas.
Yeah.
We did only for 40,
Yeah.
and the mapping, what is really, the advice from JMP team or Rick from your professional experience?
Well, the quick answer is that's way beyond the JMP and GLASS scope. But it sounds like you are well along the way to having the enabling environment ready to support climate resilient WASH. So some of these indicators around standards, existing, being implemented, you have already.
Yeah.
The indicators around finance, which touch to what you're talking about, it sounds like you've costed out, what is needed, and you know what you have and what you're implementing. So you would also be able to populate these indicators, but they would show very low level of resource compared to what's needed. Monitoring is not going to solve that. It might put you in a better position to advocate for more funds from different actors. I don't know what the solution to leveraging more funds is, but I think part of our hope is that if we can say, listen, there's a global consensus around what climate resilient WASH is, how you monitor it, we're doing that. Our monitoring shows us that these are the critical gaps. This is where we need finance, that makes it a little bit easier to tap into climate finance in particular. But
Agenda for the coming UN water conference.
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
if you want to.
Well, I was actually I was going to intervene in a process way rather than a discursive way. I'm just wondering, I know there were a few more questions. We did want to do a little bit of group work. So just with respect to everyone who still had a question, would you mind if you hold your question into the group work? But we won't forget. I mean, I know that Bethlehem was there, and I think you, Catherine, did you have your hand up? Yeah, so just hold on to those for the moment. I think we'll try and make time. Is that all right? What we wanted to do was to, exciting. I'm trying to chat to the online people. I don't know if they're there actually. We are going to move into some group work, which I think you were going to explain.
Yes.
Should I hold this?
Thanks.
I could be your backing vocalist. Doo-doo.
Yeah, so I think this discussion has been really rich. I'm a bit sad to cut it off, but I hope that we can continue it in group works, and that then we can have about 15 minutes at the end of the session to reflect back on that. So if we go from now till about 9:45, that gives us, 20, 25 minutes, like that. And a very practical first question we have of you is, we've just thrown a lot of information at you. Next Wednesday, we're going to do the same thing to a bigger global audience. What's your advice on how much to share? Do we need to go into details? Have we had version 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, or should we just here's a list of 42? So kind of processy things. How much information should we make available? But then this set of 42, it's not the answer to life, the universe, and everything. We know that. But could it be reduced further? Should it be augmented? What should be cut? So questions, and I know it's hard to digest that in a very short time period. This is more over the weeks of the consultation period. But already, if you see something obvious, you're like, something's really missing, please let us know. And then we've really struggled with the balance. So you saw that there were a lot around the policy side, Does that surprise you? Is that too many around the policy side? There were relatively few as you get to the right of the conceptual framework. Also, this question about rapid versus slow onset events, it's easier to consider rapid onset events. And a lot of the proposed indicators are around, like, you have the big event and then you measure what happened. But that leaves out these insidious slow onset things related to droughts or changes in precipitation patterns or quantity and quality of water resources available. Do we need to do more on the slow onset events? I think people have probably seen SWA's definition of climate resilient services. They're those that anticipate, respond to, cope with, recover from, adapt to, or transform based on climate events. Are we capturing that suite of verbs enough, or do we need to strengthen some of them? And then lastly, we want to be making this real and operationalizing this at the country level. And that can be small scale piloting, it can be national scale. So we're looking for partners. So if any of you have opportunities that you're aware of, please reach out to us and we'd be happy to follow up.
So as you can see, as usual with the JMP event, we're a minuscule team, JMP and Glass event. I mean, I don't even work for the JMP and Glass, so I'm doubling the size of the team available. So we're going to ask you to self-organize. I'm going to say into 4 groups.
I was thinking that too.
Yeah, so basically like a kind
maybe
of front,
2 on each side.
front row, back row, front row, back row. I'm going to nominate an organizer. Tanvi, I think we mentioned that Tanvi just organized the group for me, please. Bethlehem, can I just nominate you to boss and manage? You're wonderful at that. I mean, you're not wonderful at bossing, that sounds terrible, but if you could, I'm going over here, you know who I'm going to ask. Can you just be in charge of this kind of like gang of disparate people here? That would be great. And Katrine, would you mind just sort of corralling the group over here? You don't need to do anything more than just get everyone to sit in the right place and talk to each other. And we'll just drop in at the end at any sort of key feedback. But I think Rick's point is really important. This is that we've done a lot of global consultation on this very complicated topic. We're about to launch a consultation on this last list. So please see this as the first day, and if you are able to join us for the global launch webinar next week, and then participate in the longer period of global consultation, we will value that enormously.
Yeah, and also please don't get distracted by minute details and wordsmithing. I mean, big concepts like what is a climate event, that's fine, but like if something needs to be reworded, that will come later, not in this time period. Thanks.
So if we say household in one place and population in another, we know we'll sort it out. This basically what we're saying. Yeah. Great. And kind of 20 minutes, and then we'll drop in and see any thoughts. So, yeah, you do that. So lovely. Yeah. Okay, we're just going to ask you to wrap up. You guys have been amazing. You don't need to move if you don't want to. You can stay where you are or you can move. So just any thoughts? Can I just emphasize, we absolutely recognize that we threw a heck of a lot at you. You threw a heck of a lot of it back at us, actually. So any sort of headline reflections, but if you have other thoughts having had the conversation, if you do have time, please do reach out and drop us an email or, you know, just catch us in the corridor and give us any other feedback. And we do have the global consultation coming up as well, so we'd love to kind of recruit you as champions in that process if you can encourage others to be involved in that. So maybe I'll just start with, I'm not starting with Tanvir's group, that's very bad news. I'm going to go over here and ask the lovely group at the back who would like to just, any highlights?
Yeah, there's a few points I've written down which might be useful. Fantastic. But if they're not useful, then blame me, not the group. So the first question you asked us around how do we ready this for global consultation. One of the reflections was, and also the caveat is most people are interacting with this for the first time. So these are face value feedback, so you can take them with a pinch of salt. But explaining the methodology and the thinking process behind it was one of the things raised. It would really help people interact with the indicators that are being suggested and the domains of change. So a bit of a narrative that kind of preambles, you know, this is where we came from. And that would also explain the progression around, you know, if they're to be reduced from 600 to 42, having that have a bit of a narrative would be easy to kind of do a consultation on and have people interact with it. There was a slide where, one of the slides where the policy and all those things that you showed, that was considered really good. And if there was a handout or a packet that is to go out before a webinar or a consultation, that slide should be included because it has a bit of an infographic. And the comment was having a bit of an infographic to complement all these domains of change would be good because some are visual versus, was the framework. That's the one. That's the one.
Is that this one?
Yeah, that was quite visual, and the comment was having more visuals would be great as it lends to have people kind of interact with what's there because it's quite rich. About the reduction, you had a question around should we reduce this? Since we haven't really interacted with it to the level of detail, but recognizing and appreciating the comprehensive nature of the indicators as they should be, because it's WASH systems and CR. It might be about refining rather than reducing. So we thought that might be something for consideration. But there was a point raised by government representatives and others, is the more comprehensive and the more detailed it is, there are resource implications and time implications when we get to the practical level, and governments may not necessarily have resources for this. So perhaps positioning this would be around, localizing it and have it, embedded within what's already there. So there might be a bit of homework around looking at, okay, what's already there that lends itself to this? And then, how can this enrich that or enable that further? That way it will be embedded within current resources and current, levels of effort and time. So we thought that was interesting. So those are some of the highlights. I had a question, if you don't mind me asking. Yes, since I have the mic, I finally have the mic. I'm like, Bruce would not give me the mic. Thanks, Bruce. My question is, how does this link with the Align to Accelerate that WHO and UNICEF is working on? I was just wondering about technical alignment and what efforts there are around data harmonization and system performance monitoring between the two initiatives, because in my head I'm thinking if there's a combination, then it's easier to pilot actually. So we may have to talk about that later if there is room. And there was one question the gentleman raised around what's missing, and he explained it so nicely, so maybe he can have a chance to explain.
Yeah, so for the point that what indicators may be missing and that in these huge consortiums. So I think we talk mostly about continentality or the regions that set in one place, for example, United States, right? But we sometimes forget that the place where I come from, for example, Indonesians, Maldives, Philippines, right, where we live in thousands of islands, where mostly we live in on-site sanitation system, and it sometimes fails during the seasons, monsoon seasons, this month until the end of the year. So what indicators that maybe fit or better, right? Maybe that you can deliver, and then you talk with your consortiums and WHO, right? So I think that it's missing, right? Sometimes we always forget about the resilience of the small islands, right, that we come from. So I think that's the only thing, I think, yeah.
Cool. So just on the Align to Accelerate point, Bethlehem, absolutely connected together. So partly because the glass team is right there, front and center. So I think our idea is, the Align to Accelerate process is a little bit behind this process, but I think this would connect in, right, Rick?
Yeah, and I think we do see room for piloting the two of them side by side.
Yeah. And on your point, two things, absolutely well taken. I do want to emphasize that we were really looking for approaches which cut right across from small scale, domestic, right through to big network systems. I know exactly what you're talking about, but also just wanted to call out Rick's presentation from the JMP presentation yesterday or the day before, I can't remember which day. So JMP is now starting to look at that on-site, safely managed on-site sanitation is something we should be measuring anyway, even notwithstanding climate change. So super helpful points, thank you so much. Bethlehem, if you can, did you take notes? You took notes, okay, fine, fabulous. Great, lovely, lovely. Right, speeding on. Let's go randomly over here. And I've been wrongly calling Karen Katrin, so I'm going to call her Karen now correctly. Sorry, Karen.
Thank you. So we had a good discussion, in general consensus that this list of 42 is a good starting point for next week's consultation, and that it would be good to reduce it further. Although in further discussion, we felt maybe there is an option to have a catalogue of core indicators and optional ones, which would address. Yeah. We had a question about translation and whether consultation would be only in English or also in other languages, and the sense that sending the documents out in advance of the sessions could be useful for more interaction during the sessions. We also had a discussion around, is climate resilience different from just resilience. How do we integrate resilience to conflict and earthquakes and other types of events? Can these indicators cover this? And an important one around what is the data used for? So all of those new indicators will require resource-intensive data collection. What is this then used for? Does it help design better WASH services? Because there was also a sense that the focus should be on the service side of your theory, like making sure that reliable services are accessible to users.
We have this like what is the information being used for, and that could also be another way to kind of categorize these indicators around like the types of decisions that are used, and in terms of prioritization, like what decisions are the most important that need to be made, and then you could maybe make it. So we had a lot of discussions on this.
Good. So, and then I think last thing we had discussions around long-term trends and updating national standards, and are these actually based on evidence or not? So how do indicators support these long-term processes and more evidence-based decision-making? And another one was around anticipation, that this would be critical and also requires national level mapping and understanding of the climate hazards.
There's lots to unpack there. I just wanted to say on the anticipation thing, one of the indicators that's been in and out of the list 100 times shows how nerdy we are in our team. There is a candidate indicator for having flood risk maps. And I, for one, was super excited about that. But it's a kind of difficult thing to have as a global indicator. But it speaks to your point about a catalogue of indicators. Our idea here is to have a list of things which might be useful for programming to measure, which would help you to set yourself up to do that learning over time. Like, we did this, what was the effect? And then there's a smaller number of things which we hope would be more useful at the global level to give us in the same way that the JMP gives us a sense of progress overall. So that's where 42 seems like a big number for that purpose. But the catalogue of indicators point is very well taken. In the interest of time, I'm going to whiz along. I'm going to whiz to the back, then I'm going to come to the front.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. We had a very nice discussion. Just to summarize a few, and the group might type if something is missing. Really, we have understood that you have a very quite intensive information in the process, and going down from 600 to 42. But in terms of reducing and prioritizing, I think it needs some more time for the group, and the group is suggesting to have a kind of webinar or for further discussion and prioritization. And there was a question about how countries have been involved in the process, so that things will be more pragmatic in a way. Maybe Adam also can explain more to make the indicator distinct for policy and other components, and a big diagram which looks like a bit complicated, and how this discussion is going with other discussion like climate related ones. Are we in alignment with one? And there was also mention of some indicator in the WASH fit. In terms of duplication, and so it's better also to look into that. And the frequency is also very important. As we increase number of indicators, frequency of reporting is also paramount. Time, resource, and other is a requirement to take into account. And how about considering the sub-national level? The case of Ethiopia, as Abraham mentioning, highland, lowland, WASH is quite different in a way, so considering the subnational level is also very important, and also our donors also involved in a way that might be in line with their request and things related to that, and might be for further consideration is maybe gender component. Maybe while you are presenting, it was not indicated. Might be a missing element, is for you to consider that one. Is the color code is for presentation or any relation in due course of the presentation? Because in the paper, the color code is all away along, and document is all is something to relate to the different pages, or for presentation. Thank you.
That's a great question. Yeah, no, we tried to make this document as short as possible. We have a lot of background material, so a lot of that background of where this comes from is on the website. We have all of our reports and papers up there. It's really hard to cover off in a short presentation. The color coding in this version that you're looking at is blue for water, green for sanitation, pink for hygiene, purple for hygiene, and grey for the policy, the things which cut right across. That's just to give you. What we normally do in the presentation is we use these color codes here for showing where you are in the framework, but it's difficult to communicate. I just wanted to say one thing about your point about WashFit. I really want you to, I feel very strongly about this. The 600 indicators were harvested from the sector's general framings that we use. So things like WashFit, existing glass indicators, iWise and HWise work, Ian Ross's SANQUAL work, anything we could find that had been proposed before, because we were really keen to try and find indicators that are already somewhere being used by somebody, so that as far as possible you would minimize the additionality. And on the country engagement, I think that's really where we are now, right? We're really, I mean, we've had an amazing contribution from the technical working group and from countries on the global consultation, but now is where we would really love to go and hit the ground and talk specifically with government colleagues or project colleagues about how this looks in the real world on the ground. It was difficult to do that earlier because it's a big old question, so we kind of wanted to get to this point, so then you've got something you can respond to. Yeah. Can I chip into this group here?
I can be real quick. So we were really into the process, and I think one thing that came out is in just understanding in presenting and understanding it, kind of understanding where the data is coming from. So it would be nice to know, like, this is government level data, this is household level data, and organizing it that way could help us understand exactly where this data is plugging in, or just some sort of chart that kind of organizes them that way, because then for those of us who do this work, we're like, well, where is this coming from and how could I get it? And so we talked a lot about that. And then the other thing, which kind of echoes some of what other people said, is it would be really nice if, I know it's country level, but kind of clicking on and off, like if we're looking at sea level rise, we're looking at country level, sea level rise, across, with, like, you know, specifically, obviously then you're in a region of a country, but then you're not aggregating the highlands and the lowlands for sea level rise. And so kind of being able to click on and off these disaster, slow or instance disasters in order to get an idea of, like, how prepared for hurricanes are the world, right? And some places never have a typhoon or a hurricane, so they'll go out, but then we can actually look in a thematic, like a climate band, what's happening and how do they compare to each other.
And just, you know, there's lots of indicators and it's organized by theme. And so we discussed, organizing by where the data is coming from. But there's lots of different ways that you could also organize it, right? You could, the temporality of the data, like which data are going to vary the most over time. You could also organize it by the resource and time, right, required to collect the data. You could organize it by, you know, like the impact, the types of decisions that are being made. And so, you know, when there's so much, then thinking about these categories of ways of, like, displaying the data so people can kind of versus.
So you can see, like, high level what wash indicators are coming in, at the high level what wash indicators are we getting at the local level from household indicators.
No, cool. I mean, I think one of the problems is it's a bit iterative because where we get the data from, I'm hoping will also mature a bit, right?
Yeah, and those are great questions, and we were thinking about that during the process, but it's hard to do while the list of indicators itself is still developing. So, like, when we had, 300 indicators, we weren't ready to tag them all to, like, this will come from this will come from that. But we are hopefully at that stage going forward at the country pilot. That would be a big part of it.
Just to reiterate, the global consultation will run for a period of time. I can't remember what it is, but it will kick off with a seminar on Wednesday, the 5th of November. The background material is on the website. We'll try and put some more information up there with the new shortlist. We produced this, as I say, we printed this at 2 o'clock last night, so it'll get tidied up a little bit. I mean, the time scale for doing this work has been very tight, so we do apologise if you feel, people that have engaged with the process all the way through feel like they've been swamped with information. But we really would love to have your inputs through this process. And also, if there's any interest in talking to the team about opportunities for piloting, I think that's what we really want to do, is bring it to the real level now and see how it might actually look.
Reach out to us at washmonitoring@who.int. And we also do want to thank the donors who made this possible, especially the UK FCDO and the Dutch DGIS.
Cool. Thanks very much, guys. I apologise enormously because you're about to go to a plenary. We're going to hear a load of this again, but not so much.
But not 42 indicators.
Not 42 indicators. Great, thanks, guys. I don't know if I can stop the meeting. Oh, I think I can. Yeah. Do I just end the meeting? Are you leaving?